Hello, everyone, and thanks so much for coming to this webinar on serious to simple proactive hazard identification methods. My name is Dawn Moninger, and I am the Corporate EHS Director for JD Heiskell Company. We are a 137-year-old grain and commodity trading business. We operate livestock feed manufacturing facilities across 6 different states. We have transloading facilities, and we do some overseas exports as well. We have a really robust safety culture, and we demonstrate our commitment to our core value of safety first every day. And hopefully these tips and tricks that I'm going to give you here going forward in this webinar kind of shows you how we do that, and it gives you some inspiration for hazard identification for your future success as well. So starting off, what we're going to do is we're going to talk through hazard identification team safety. This is one area that's kind of often forgotten, especially when we start off getting out there trying to identify hazards. We're going to move into the right tool for the right job. We're going to talk about the actual hazard identification methods, which range anywhere from a simple 5 and 5 to a really in-depth immersion week. We're going to talk about risk scoring, record keeping, and follow-up. So because this webinar is not designed to be all-inclusive and exhaustive, I'm going to go through these slides pretty quickly with the idea that you're going to get my gist here with just a quick overview. So let's talk hazard ID team safety. When we send people out to look for hazards, we want to make sure that they don't actually come in contact with hazards themselves. I mean, what good are we if we are putting our own people in danger? So it's really important before you embark upon hazard identification that your team is really well versed in what hazards face them. Things like, as you go through and you're doing, we'll just say a hazard identification walk, hazards such as falls or slips or trips, those are really, those are big risks for even the identification team. So you want to make sure that you're laying out really particular rules for them, reminders and awareness for the environment that they're getting ready to go into. We talk a lot about falls because our facilities, like I mentioned, they're grain elevators. And so we do a lot of climbing up and down ladders and on different types of platforms. So we really have to make sure that our team looks at it from the perspective of, you know, you're climbing a ladder and you want to take a picture of a hazard, but we want to make sure that you're not doing it from a compromised position of standing on a ladder. So too, we want to make sure that we're letting the team know that there is the potential hazard for pedestrian and PIT interaction as they're doing their hazard identification. So we want to make sure that they are on the lookout for powered industrial trucks. We want them to be aware of potholes, slippery platforms, and just general facility safety. We want to make sure, of course, that our team is wearing all required PPE. And this is really key. We want to make sure that our team is hydrated, that they've eaten, that they're not sick, that they use the buddy system, all of the things that will assure a successful hazard identification time for our team. They come out on the other end with some valuable findings, but most importantly, they come out on the other end safely. So the reason that I've worked collaboratively with the safety leaders in JD Heiskell to create different types of hazard identification methods is because it's really incumbent upon us to ensure that we're using the right tool for the right job. So there's different types of hazard identification methods for finding different types of hazards. And this is really important because it allows for a diverse perspectives that are not otherwise apparent for people. And so what I mean by that is a different method of hazard identification can be used for a frontline employee versus, we'll just say, for instance, our COO or our CEO comes to do some sort of hazard identification method. We want to make sure that he has the right tool to do that as well. And most importantly, those different sets of eyes, they're looking for hazards. And giving them the right tool, make sure that this broader scope that we have is more comprehensive, it's in depth, but most importantly, it feels comfortable and easy for the person who's working with that identification method. And then again, as you all have probably come into contact, you know that it matters that you're using the right method that's suited for a specific situation. You know, we don't want to use a hammer where we could use a screwdriver, or use a screwdriver where you could use a hammer. So really important, and even in the realm of hazard identification, that we are using the right tool for the right job. So one of the things that we do, you've heard me mention already, is a hazard ID walk. Pretty simple, self-explanatory. It can be one person, or it can be a team of people trained in hazard identification. Hazards that are specific to a facility, or hazards that are specific to an operation. This can be conducted while people are walking around the facility with that special intent of finding hazards. It can be focused in one area, or it can be focused across the entire facility. When hazards are found that are over a certain threshold, interim control measures are put in place. So in other words, so if you find something that is an immediate danger to life or health, you want to make sure that you've put a barricade, or you've put tape, or you've stopped the operation, or you've put an appropriate measure in place to make sure somebody doesn't walk into that hazard and get hurt, just as you've identified it. And so along those same lines, as you're doing this hazard ID walk, you want to make sure that you're assigning each of the hazards some sort of risk assessment code. Is this a really high hazard? Is this a lower risk hazard? And where does that fall in your corrective action methodology? And of course, as you're doing your hazard ID walk, you want to make sure that you are photographing your hazards as well. This is a really cool tool that I developed for JD Heiskell. And this was meant for the person who says, I just don't have time for safety. I am too busy. I can't be involved. Safety is too much for me to deal with. And so this 5 and 5 is really cool. We have dozens of these developed, and a 5 and 5 is exactly what it sounds like. It is 5 components of compliance, and you can get it completed within 5 minutes. And so you'll see here, we have a simple one of facility entrance and parking lot inspection 5 and 5. And it walks the person through what it is that they should be looking for, and it gives them an area to take notes. And those notes eventually turn into a corrective action for later. All said and told, this shouldn't take more than 5 minutes, but what is really cool about this is that anybody can perform it, and it's also a teaching method as well. We have dozens of these created, and one of the really cool ones that we have this year is for heat injury and illness prevention. We have a multitude. We have ones that cover catwalk inspections. We have above ground storage tank. We have fire extinguishers. So I encourage you to take this idea and run with it, because this definitely is the right tool for the busy person. You all probably already work your own inspections. Inspections are such a critical and basic foundational piece of any hazard identification program. And, you know, we always tend to think, oh, this is just, you know, pencil whipping or additional paperwork. But when you have people that are committed to doing the right thing for the goodness of the facility, the facility's employees, and the facility infrastructure, checklists are definitely the way to go, because this is one of the routine ways that we make sure that even the safety 101 aspects are covered, and we have written record of them that we can keep historical documentation on, very important, but then also retrieve the key hazards identified through the inspection process. And I know, okay, so my next slide is safety committees. Typically when I present this out loud and to a live audience, I hear a lot of moans and groans over this, and I understand it, but safety committees are really key in hazard identification as well. I encourage you to use your safety committee to get some of your key hazard identification completed, some of your key inspections, key hazard ID walks, key job safety analysis, task hazard analyses. Use your safety committees as a platform for not just learning, but actually executing your safety programs centered around hazard identification. Because let's face it, your safety committee and its composition, ranges anywhere from your frontline to your midline supervisors, all the way up to your facility management. These are prime people who are in the thick of things, and they can really identify hazards for you and from multiple perspectives. You all are probably familiar with the task hazard analysis. A properly performed task hazard analysis is going to really break down an operation step by step, and it is going to discuss your control measures, and then it's going to give you ideas for where you need to go to improve this process. What other risk is there? Is there residual risk that cannot be mitigated? So your task hazard analysis is a great opportunity to find risk inside of each task. If you take it seriously, you break it down by steps, and you talk about the control measures for what you will do to control the risk with each step. Similarly, the more popular job safety analysis, which to me is a larger overview of a project. And a job safety analysis is great, but it is really overarching. And we have to be careful not to just take a job safety analysis, complete it, identify the hazards in the beginning of the job, but then fail to have checkpoints throughout the job to ensure that the methods that you've employed at the beginning of the job to mitigate hazards are actually working. Also, throughout the course of a job, we do know that additional hazards arise, unforeseen hazards. So it's really important that a job safety analysis be completed at intervals throughout a job, but it is a very valuable hazard identification tool. Along these lines, it goes really closely with the job safety analysis, because most oftentimes we do a job safety analysis when we begin a large project. One of the things that we do to continually check up on our contractors, continually check up on the job safety of a project, is a contractor scorecard. This is really cool because this allows you a formal interaction with your contractors. It allows you to show a presence on the job, follow through on your goals for job safety, but then also provide them with the needed feedback. This is really great because, again, it's a formal way to identify risk. It's a formal way to communicate that risk. And then, of course, because it is a formal document, you can record it, create corrective actions, and go from there. A contractor scorecard is excellent, especially for historical purposes, when you have a particular contractor that you need to stay in front of and really interact with and make sure that the entire project goes as safely as it can. This is really cool. I think y'all remember in the beginning of this webinar, I did mention how we're a safety first company, and we demonstrate that daily through our commitment to that principle. And this is one of the greatest things that we do that demonstrates that core value. We have this hazard identification method called a fly-in. And this is really cool because, as I mentioned, we have operations across the United States. Well, what we do is we take leaders from all of our locations across the United States and we fly them into one location and we do a massive hazard ID walk. We divide the facility up into areas, and we assign teams to these particular areas in the facility. They conduct their actual hazard ID walk. And then, of course, we make sure that we give them a safety briefing ahead of time. They identify hazards, they photograph the hazards, and then we all come back together as a group. We assign risk assessment codes to the hazards. We make sure interim control measures are put in place. And most importantly, that these hazards are recorded in our safety management system for, we call it rack and stack, where we put that risk assessment code and we assign priorities for how they'll get fixed later on. It is a massive endeavor. And you can imagine the amount of resources that go into such a hazard identification method of this magnitude. It's quite the commitment of our company. Here's a quick overview of how we do it. We divide up the mill, like I said, and then we assign team members to each of the locations for them to focus their hazard ID efforts on as they photograph those areas and then bring back all of their findings to us. This is another demonstration of how we show our core belief of safety first and a great hazard identification method. Our company at times will acquire a new part of our business or a new facility. And what we do to make sure that this facility gets absorbed into our cultural standard for safety is we will do an immersion week. And it's pretty much what it sounds like. Similar to a fly-in, instead of taking leaders from across our company, instead we take all of our environmental health and safety professionals from across the company. We fly them into the newly acquired facility, and we do an immersion week where we are actually scrubbing programs from top to bottom, side to side, and we are making sure that the programs at the new facility match our safety programs and our goals. But also, we do hazard identification, and that hazard identification during immersion week includes obvious like hazard ID walks, task hazard analyses, but we're also making sure that we're identifying gaps in their written programs as well. And much like a hazard ID walk or the fly-in that I discussed, we're following those same procedures where we're making sure that we're assigning a risk assessment code and that we are walking through those hazards, photographing them, recording them, and creating a strategy for correcting them. But this is another hazard identification method that is of very large magnitude, but it yields incredibly valuable data. And it really sets the facility up for success. And we can leave immersion week feeling comfortable that the facility that we just acquired is absolutely progressing and being reflective of our ultimate safety culture of safety first. So like I said, we do definitely go through, we scrub all of their programs. We go through and we do the physical hazard identification. And we make sure that during this immersion week, not only are we identifying hazards, but we're also fixing them. So that means that our EHS professionals that have flown in to do this immersion week, we're there and we are painting lines on floors and we are hanging signs and we are creating EAPs and we are getting our hands dirty, where typically we would go in, simply identify hazards and then record them and leave. An immersion week is really meant for scrubbing and cleaning and painting and signs, among other typical hazard identification methods. It's a really valuable week for our company. Other hazard identification methods that we utilize are much like ones that you are familiar with already. We have a very robust facility self-audit program, which is exactly what it sounds like. We take a portion of our corporate audit and we break it down into critical safety months that focus on critical safety programs, where we have to do an internal audit of that program within the month. And that yields some great findings, hazardous gaps that may exist within our programs, be that written or physical. And again, like everybody else, we do an incident investigation and root cause analyses, and these trends often lead to major hazard identification for us so that we can correct it and then, prevent its recurrence. Similarly, with near miss reports and the root cause analyses that come from our near miss reports, that's key hazard identification methods right there. We also conduct employee interviews at regular intervals, and sitting one-on-one, face-to-face with an employee really gives a great opportunity for the employee's voice to be heard, for them to know how seriously we take our safety program. And again, what they have to say is some of our best hazard identification abilities. It's the same with employee suggestions. And much like you, I'm sure that you have an employee suggestion box. Well, we do too. We make sure that we take our employee suggestions really seriously. And at the end of the month, when we conduct training, we're reading our employee suggestions out loud, identifying the hazard that the employee discusses, and we talk about how we're going to mitigate that hazard. So too, we use property damage reports as areas of hazard identification for us as well. Processes that we can improve, traffic flow that we can correct, or operations that need to change to prevent property damage. And then again, probably much like you all, our corporate audit. Our corporate audit happens yearly, and this is a great identification method as well, because it's a great combination of not just administrative overview, but it's also a physical overview of each facility. And at the end of our corporate audit, we make sure that we provide detailed notes that allow the facility to mark their own progress towards correction, record keeping, and then proper follow-up. And that flows really great into this next slide of record keeping follow-up. It's really important for you to make sure that your record keeping is on par, because all of these actions are for naught if you are not keeping correct records, but then making sure that you're gleaning the information from those records that you need, and then following up to close out the issue initially recognized. And so how do we record keep? We use, obviously, photographs. We want to make sure that we're putting the location that the photographs were taken. We want to refer to specific compliance criteria. And like I said, we want to make sure that we're assigning some sort of risk assessment code so that the person who is in charge of correcting these hazards knows what priority they are. Is it an immediate danger to life or health priority, or is it something that can wait a little while to be corrected? And so we want to make sure that your record keeping and your follow-up is conducted in a very standardized and routine manner that is sustainable, so that you don't lose all of the critical work that you've put into identifying hazards. JD Heiskell, this is our risk assessment matrix that we use to assign a risk assessment code. It's really rudimentary, and there are more complex ones out there, but we wanted to start with something really easy. This risk assessment matrix is built inside of our safety management system, so that when we're inputting our hazards, we are also able to input where that hazard falls on a risk assessment matrix. And we use a risk assessment code exercise like this with our hazard identification teams, as well as through routine employee training. We want everybody to understand the difference between a catastrophic hazard versus one that is a lower level or unlikely hazard. And teaching people this not only is great for record keeping, but it's also great for when they're actually working in the role of hazard identification, be that a JSA, be that a THA, immersion week, or a fly-in. They're able to say whether or not that hazard that they've identified is something that needs an interim control measure right away, or if it's something that can wait. And so this is really key to making sure that not only the hazard identification team stays safe, but obviously that we're doing exactly what it is that we say that we're doing. And we're putting safety first and making sure that everybody goes home safely at the end of the day. And that is what I have for you today. And I really thank you for being here. You must be here because you feel as committed to safety as JD Heiskell does. And so thank you so much for attending.